Hey, it's Ollie from iwillteachyoualanguage.com, and in this video, you're going to get a slightly different perspective because I've invited a very special guest to answer your language learning questions. Who is it? None other than Lindsay from Lindsay Does Languages. So let's get into it. Question number 1 comes from Alan, who asks, don't you think it's a tad odd that all around South America they speak Spanish? And then there's Brazil that speaks Portuguese. What's going on?
Hi Alan. So yeah, I guess it kind of looks a little bit odd on the surface perhaps, but it's just history, isn't it? Colonization, etc. And so I guess that's why. So it's a bit strange when you kind of just look at it and think, oh wow, look at all these countries that speak Spanish and there's one country that speaks Portuguese. How strange. But the other thing that I think is interesting is how big Brazil is, and not just how many speakers of Portuguese that means it has, but also how many other languages there are. In fact, not only in Brazil, but in that whole kind of region of the world. So yeah, it is an interesting point.
The next question comes from Adam, who asks, how should I design a self-study program if I'm not sure if I'm an advanced beginner or an intermediate learner?
Hi Adam. So you have a brilliant opportunity right now. The fact that you aren't sure whether you're an advanced beginner or a kind of lower intermediate is fine. The fact that you are in charge and you're designing your own self-study program is amazing. That's the bit that's really, really cool for you right now. So you have the advantage of deciding, right, what do I want to do? You don't have to go to a bookshop and find the course that says advanced beginner or the course that says lower intermediate. You can just decide, right, where am I at? What do I feel like, is right for me right now? And experiment. That's the best thing I can recommend. So have perhaps, if you have resources that work for you right now, kind of incorporate them into your kind of sort of self-study routine, but also maybe have, maybe one day a week where you just experiment. So you try something new. Maybe you've got a list of things. There's so many resources out there, right? I'm not sure what language you're studying, but there's so much. So maybe you've got a list of things you want to try, but you haven't got around to trying yet. You have one day a week where that's your kind of free day to just find new things, find things that are at your level, so just experiment with it, because the beauty of that as well is that you might find things that will be brilliant for you later on, but that right now are just a little bit too advanced. And that will help you to decide where your level is just from experimenting. So yeah, give it a go and good luck and have fun.
Up next is Noha, who asks, is it possible to learn relatively similar languages, like Spanish and Italian, at the same time without mixing them up?
Hi Noah. So yes, this is possible. Whether I'd recommend it or not is another thing. I mean, I've definitely done this in the past, mostly out of necessity. For example, when I was at school and I started Spanish, in my school you had to keep doing French to show that you were good at languages or whatever. It was very strange, but that meant that I had these two languages. One was slightly more advanced than the other, one was complete beginner, and I felt like I had a bit of a leg up. Now, of course, there's a difference. You mentioned Spanish and Italian. I think there's a difference between French and Spanish, for example, and then Spanish and Italian. Spanish and Italian for me are a lot more similar. And I find with my knowledge of Spanish being a lot better than my knowledge of Italian, I don't tend to mix Spanish up, but I do tend to fill in the blanks in Italian with Spanish. Does that make sense? So that, I guess, is the risk. If you're starting from the same level, I don't think I'd recommend this because it's so much more likely that you're going to confuse things. It's definitely possible to learn multiple languages at the same time. One of the biggest things here is that you have, two big things. Number one, you kind of have a good routine. You know that you are going to keep making progress. You're quite solid with yourself and strict with your routine and your habits for doing that. The second thing is that you have to tell yourself and understand you won't make progress as fast. So for example, you go online, you see someone who's learned, Japanese in 6 months or whatever, and they're amazing. And you think, wow, hang on a minute, I've been learning Japanese for 3 years and I'm nowhere near as good as that. Well, what if you're learning Japanese for 3 years, but you're also learning Thai, let's say, at the same time? Of course you're nowhere near as good as that because you haven't been focusing. So it depends what you want. If you are kind of looking at the minute for multiple languages and you need to get to a good level in different languages, then that's fine. You can do it and accept that it will take longer. But if you actually just need to focus and really get to a higher level in one language, then maybe learning multiple languages at the same time isn't such a good idea, and especially similar ones.
Now, next up is a question from Andy, who asks, how emotionally connected do you feel to the languages that you learn? He goes on to say, do you have favourite languages? Something you just enjoy more? Does this help maintain stronger lifelong motivation for certain languages? And on the other hand, do you get to a point where you realise, hey, this language project has just run its course? No pun intended, I guess.
Hi Andy, this is a great question and a huge question, so I'm going to try and break it down bit by bit. So, do you get emotionally connected to languages? Yeah, I think so. I think this definitely happens. Whether you want to or not, I find that I associate a language with where I was and what I was doing in my life at that time when I started studying it. So there's almost a nostalgia attached to it. Whether that's a good or a bad thing, I don't know. But yeah, I think you definitely form some kind of connection with a language. And I think sometimes it's better than others. So you have to find, I think, something that you love in a language, whether it's music, film, book, food, culture, something about it that you can engage with and you can connect with. And that's going to be huge for motivation. So that comes round to, I'm trying to check all your questions, that comes round to, I think, one of the other things you mentioned about, does it affect motivation? Yeah, definitely. So recently, and then again, linking into your other question, I was learning Korean for maybe 6 or 7 months this year. And it was fine. I found it interesting. It was great, but I just hadn't found a connection. So I hadn't got to that point where I was invested in the language because it just didn't, I hadn't clicked with it. And so I figured, it's fine. Now's a good time to stop. I can come back later if I want to. I've got a bit of a grounding in the language. So yeah, and the thing that's difficult with that, I think, is that accepting that it's okay to do that. Because a lot of the time we think, I'm going to learn, let's say Korean, I'm going to learn Korean. So we feel like, well, I have to keep learning Korean until I'm fluent in Korean. But what does fluent even mean? And how, you never finish learning a language. So how are you supposed to then, move on and do something else, whether it's learn another language or a completely different thing altogether that you want to spend your time on? So accepting that it's okay to sort of end a language project or just stop learning a language for a little bit at least is a big thing. And so once you've accepted that, it's definitely worthwhile if you find something isn't working for you. Coming on to, I think, the most difficult part of your question, do I have a favourite language? I don't like this question because I think that, it's like picking a favourite child, I guess. But I would have to be, if you want a one-word answer and you were going to pin me down, gun to my head, whatever, I would say Spanish, I think, because Spanish is a language that I connect with well, I've got that connection, but also it's the language that has kind of got me to where I am today, because it's the first language I fell in love with, it's the first one I realised, oh, this is a thing and I can do this thing, and it's the one that led me to learn so many more. Now, it wasn't my first language, so French was the first language that I learned, first foreign language I learned, and Spanish came after, but I never found that same connection with French. Spanish I chose to study, French I had to study, and I think that plays a big part in it too. So yeah, if you want a one-word answer, I would have to say Spanish is my favourite language, but I don't like to pigeonhole and put things in boxes.
We finish with a question from Clayton, who asks, what's your opinion on the introvert-extrovert war in language learning?
Hi, interesting question. So I find it really interesting that personality, in particular introvert-extrovert at the moment, seems to be a big thing. I find it really interesting that that's only just become recently a discussion in language learning. Because if we kind of take a step back and not just look at our language learning, but look at our personalities and who we are as people and what we enjoy, what we don't enjoy and all of that, then that is going to affect our language learning. So it seems like a really important starting point to decide, are you introverted or are you extroverted? What's your personality type? What makes you tick? What do you love? What do you not enjoy? What do you want? And those kind of questions that we don't always ask ourselves. We just assume, oh, well, I saw someone on the internet and they were doing this, so I should probably do that to learn a language and I'm going to learn a language. But not necessarily. And I think, like you describe the introvert-extrovert war, I wouldn't necessarily call it a war. I would say that it is just different people that have different voices and different opinions and different ways of learning languages. and together, there's two things that could happen, I think. It either looks incredibly overwhelming, you think, whoa, hang on, whoa, I don't know who to believe. And it's not about who to believe, because no one is right and wrong here. It's just people have different methods and different techniques and whatever it is, and they are all right for them. You know, a lot of the time, like, I will write things that I know work for me or would work for me in certain situations, but I wouldn't then go and think, okay, well, I have to make everyone kind of want to learn a language. You know, that's not my job. The job of me is to make people that understand and kind of can relate to what I write feel like they want to learn a language. Whereas there's other people out there, other language bloggers, people on the internet, whatever it is, that feel, you know, something differently, that's fine. And so it's not a war, I wouldn't say, it's just a difference of opinion, which is completely valid, because at the end of the day, there's no one like be all and end all way to learn a language. There is no one right way. And so having these different opinions shouldn't be something that we think, whoa, everyone is different and so this person must hate that person, or this is like a war or anything like that. It should just be, okay, well, let me take a step back, and where do I fit in here? What works for me? What do I connect with? Am I introverted? Am I extroverted? And maybe consider even taking like a personality quiz. There's the 16 personalities, is it? I think it's called. You get like a 4-letter thing. That was really interesting. I took that and actually it was pretty accurate. So it's not just about introvert, extrovert. It goes a little bit beyond that. So it's, you know, it's quite thorough. Also, Gretchen Rubin's 4 tendencies test, which doesn't focus on introvert, extrovert at all. That I found very interesting for language learning. So I found that, you know, knowing what I am on there kind of gives me a basis of, that's why I love that, and that's why I don't enjoy doing that when I'm learning a language. And when you understand that about yourself, you can understand it in your language learning, you'll be more forgiving with yourself as well. Because a lot of the time, it's very easy, this happens not just in languages, but, you know, fitness, health, whatever, and you see, I should do that, I should eat that, I should exercise more, whatever. And maybe not, maybe that's not right for you. But when you understand who you are as a person and your own personality, and, you know, then you can decide. You're then in control of what you pick and choose, you know, what advice you pick and choose to take when it comes to sort of introversion or extroversion, etc. Me personally, I think I'm more on the introvert side of things. I've always preferred to learn alone than to like start day one, go out and just find people in the street or whatever. That's a very obviously basic example of introvert-extrovert difference. But yeah, I mean, the thing is as well to consider, like, I wouldn't do that in English. I wouldn't just go out and think, excuse me, I would just do that in my own language, so why would I do it in another language or for another language? That wouldn't be something I would do myself, so why change my personality for a language? That seems strange. But yeah, I definitely don't think it's a war. I think it's kind of a blessing in a way to have so many different voices sharing how they learn languages. So yeah, definitely give the personality test to go and see where you fit, and yeah, enjoy. Ollie, thank you so much for having me on your channel. It's been a pleasure, and if you want to see more from me, you can visit lindsaydoeslanguages.com, or you can subscribe to my YouTube channel. I make language videos pretty regularly, and you can do that. Maybe Ollie's gonna make me clickable, I don't know. So I hope to see you there. Bye!